Hello and welcome to Ukraine Today. My name is Sam Kearley and we are joined by Inna Sovsun, the first Deputy Minister of Education and Science in Ukraine. Inna, thank you for joining us. Could you start by telling us what has the Ministry of Education done over the last 15 months?
Over the last 15 months, we started last year with finally adopting the new law on higher education. It was being developed for a few years before that by the academic community, and we got it passed through the parliament in July last year and started implementing it September 2014. There is the first big reform package that was passed by the at the moment the previous parliament, and it was very symbolic that we started with the higher education law. So we have put a lot of effort on implementing this new law on higher education. In parallel, we were also working on the new law on education that would cover both preschool, schools, vocational education and training, that will provide the general framework as to how the Ukrainian education system should be changed and in what direction it should be moving. So there was a parallel process to the implementation of the new law on higher education. And of course, we had to put some effort into dealing with the current situation, which has of course added a lot of extra work to the everyday life here in the Ministry of Education and Science, dealing with the IDPs, with the university evacuation, with lost documents, educational documents of people from the conflict zones and so on and so forth. So that is something that the Ministry didn't have much experience in doing, but that was a big part of the job during the last 15 months as well.
Which areas of education in Ukraine are seeing the most changes from the reforms?
Well, I would say that by now the biggest changes are happening in the higher education field due to the new law on higher education. The main idea of the new law on higher education is to provide higher autonomy to the universities and at the same time to change the accountability model. Because previously we had this extremely centralized accountability model where the university rector is only accountable to the minister and he is trying his best to please the ministry. But he was not accountable to the community in general, to the people working in universities, to the students, and so on and so forth. The idea behind the higher education reform is this. We provide high autonomy to the universities. They get more academic autonomy. They can decide on their own programs. We are not telling them what courses to teach and how to teach them. We just set up the general benchmarks, what the students should know by the end of the study period. But it's up for the university to decide how you reach the results expected. But at the same time, the university needs to be more accountable and more open to the society, to the public, both internally within the university and outside of the university. So there are some provisions that prescribe that, let's say, the universities need to publish their financial statement on their website. That is a very simple thing, as it seems to be, yet it has never been done in Ukrainian universities before. So now we are opening up more information about what is happening in the university for the community, and we expect that the academic community and wider community, professional associations, employees and so on, they will get more involved into what is happening in the university and make universities not some small ivory towers that are totally separated from the society, but integrate the universities more in the society, in economy, into the community. And that is a very challenging process, of course, because it's not only about changing the legislation. Well, clearly changing the legislation was a difficult political process, but getting that implemented and changing the very culture that exists in the university, making it more open, more autonomous, more dynamic, that is a very big challenge. It will take some years to change that.
So you said that universities now have to put their financial statements online for everyone to see.
Yes.
So what else is the Ministry of Education doing to combat corruption within education?
Well, clearly more transparency and more accountability is the number one step in combating corruption in any ways. We have also been working in case we knew about some corruption in some universities. We did ask the law enforcement agencies to investigate those. Unfortunately, this is not always an efficient mechanism because not all of them are ready to get involved into that, or they're not willing or professional enough to investigate some cases. But also in a lot of cases, particularly when we are talking about the petty bribery that is happening in universities, it's basically impossible to prove that this is happening unless the student who is paying the bribe, let's say he goes to the law enforcement agency, to police or prosecutor's office, and tells them that this professor is asking me for a bribe. I can record that, and if that is recorded with official permission from the law enforcement, then we can prove that there was some bribery happening. Otherwise, it's basically impossible to prove. And this creates the problem for us because most students are not willing. They're willing to report the bribery. They're willing to say that this professor is taking bribes, but they're not ready to deal with the law enforcement and providing any real proof that can be used for further on for any administrative or legal action. So that is, of course, problematic. Another big problem is that any international experience shows that in order to combat petty bribery, the number one step should be raising the salaries of the staff, of the people who are taking the decisions. And of course, within this situation that we are in now, we cannot really raise the salaries to our professors. So that is now when we have the cuts all over the budget system in order to provide for the Ministry of Defense and to help the army. Of course, we cannot really be talking about raising the salaries for the teachers and professors.
Finally, we'd just like to take one question which has come from one of our viewers on Facebook, which is a Mr. Andrew Greziv. Andrew asks, as recently announced, the school graduates from occupied Crimea cannot be accepted to Ukrainian universities if they have a Russian graduate certificate. Of course, this is an obviously legal decision, he writes. However, they are still Ukrainians and they are longing to study and live in Ukraine. Would the Ministry of Education be flexible on this policy?
We are as flexible as the legislation allows us to be. And at the moment, the legislation is such that we cannot accept any documents where on top of the documents it says Republic of Crimea of the Russian Federation. That is part of the national legislation and we have to follow it. If that legislation is changed, then we are ready to change the mechanisms that we are using. But at the moment, within the current legislation that we have, what we did, we developed the secondary legislation that helps children from Crimea, as well as from the military conflict down in Donbass, to apply for the special mechanism of receiving a legitimate Ukrainian school certificate. So you have to apply to a school and ask to pass the final examination, and based on that final examination, you will get a Ukrainian certificate. So this mechanism does exist, and thousands of people have used this mechanism to receive Ukrainian school living certificate, and they are now applying to study in Ukrainian universities. So this mechanism does exist. Of course, we have very limited possibilities for spreading the information about this mechanism, particularly in Crimea, because of course, because of the censorship, media censorship, internet censorship, any information about the opportunities that exist for people in Crimea within Ukraine is very limited. However, we have tried our best, and we can see that a lot of children from Crimea have done that. They have received the legitimate Ukrainian certificate. Of course, I do realize that for them it is much more difficult to receive the certificate compared to other school graduates in other parts of the country. But it is much easier than just studying over and repeating the whole year in general.
Inna, thank you very much for joining us. You have been watching Ukraine Today, where we have been joined by Miss Inna Sovsun, the first Deputy Minister of Education and Science in Ukraine. Thank you for watching.